Look at any building constructed before 1930. Stone carvings above the doorways, columns with hand-cut fluting, cornices that catch the afternoon light just so. Now look across the street at what replaced it. A glass rectangle, a concrete slab, a building that could be anywhere, built by anyone, meaning nothing. Something happened. And the story of why we stopped building beautifully is stranger, more political, and more deliberate than most people realize. For most of human history, buildings were expected to be beautiful, not as a luxury, as a baseline. From Roman temples to Gothic cathedrals to the Beaux-Arts train stations of the early 1900s, architecture served two masters: function and meaning. A courthouse looked like justice. A library looked like knowledge. Ornament wasn't decoration, it was language. The craft traditions that produced this work were deep and deliberate. A stonemason didn't just cut stone. He spent years learning to read it, to follow its grain, to coax form from it without force. Ornamental plasterers trained for a decade before they were trusted with a cornice. Woodcarvers, gilders, ironworkers. Each was a specialist, and each was valued for it. Clients expected quality because quality was the standard. Cities competed through their buildings. A bank, a courthouse, a train station was a statement. We take this seriously. Architectural education reflected this. Students spent years learning the classical orders, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, not as arbitrary decoration, but as a living vocabulary refined across millennia. The idea that a building should be beautiful wasn't taught as a preference. It was treated as a professional obligation. Then came the 20th century, and everything changed. In 1919, Walter Gropius founded the Bauhaus School in Weimar, Germany. His mission was radical: strip architecture down to its industrial essentials. No ornament, no historical reference. Buildings should express their materials: steel, glass, concrete, honestly, without disguise. Gropius wasn't alone. In Vienna, Adolf Loos had already published his infamous 1908 essay, Ornament and Crime, declaring architectural decoration a sign of cultural degeneracy. In France, Le Corbusier called houses machines for living in, and envisioned cities of identical concrete towers separated by highways. These weren't fringe ideas. They were a movement, modernism, and it carried the moral weight of a revolution. Ornament was dishonest. Tradition was oppressive. The old architecture represented a world of aristocracy and inequality. The new architecture would be democratic, rational, universal. After World War II, the modernists won, completely. The war destroyed vast swaths of European cities. Rebuilding was urgent. Modernism offered speed, standardized components, prefabricated concrete panels, no need for skilled craftsmen carving gargoyles. In America, the post-war economic boom demanded offices, housing, and infrastructure at a pace that handcraft could never match. But something else happened too, something quieter and more permanent. The skilled trades that had built the old world simply weren't passed on. The stonemasons, the ornamental plasterers, the woodcarvers. They aged out of the workforce, and the new architecture didn't need them. Why carve when you could pour? Why train when you could fabricate? The economics of speed made handcraft uncompetitive, and so the apprenticeship pipelines dried up. Architecture schools followed the ideology. Classical design, the proportional systems, the orders, the relationship between structure and ornament, was quietly dropped from curricula across Europe and America. It wasn't banned. It simply stopped being taught. By the 1960s, an architecture graduate could design a curtain wall tower with precision, but couldn't tell you the difference between a dentil and a triglyph. The language wasn't forbidden, it just wasn't handed down. The demolition of New York's Pennsylvania Station in 1963 crystallized the loss. McKim, Mead and White's 1910 masterpiece, modelled on the Roman baths of Caracalla, with 150-foot ceilings and Doric colonnades, was torn down and replaced with a low-ceilinged underground warren beneath Madison Square Garden. The historian Vincent Scully wrote, "One entered the city like a god. One scuttles in now like a rat." The outcry over Penn Station helped launch the modern preservation movement, but the building was already gone. Tempo. Slow. Today, the reasons compound. Building codes optimized for safety and cost discourage complex facades. Real estate economics reward maximum leasable square footage, not sculptural expression. Zoning laws, particularly setback and FR requirements, produce the same boxy shapes everywhere. And the global construction industry runs on materials and methods that favor repetition: curtain wall glass, poured concrete, steel frames. But the deepest reason is cultural. We lost the consensus that buildings should be beautiful. Modernism taught architects that beauty was suspicious, bourgeois, sentimental, dishonest. What replaced it was a profession that talks to itself about form, program, and materiality, while the public walks past and feels nothing. Tempo. Moderate. There are signs of a counter-movement. New classical architects like Robert A.M. Stern and firms winning the Dry House Architecture Prize are building with ornament and historical reference again. Public surveys consistently show that people prefer traditional architecture over modernist designs, by wide margins. And a new generation, raised on social media, where aesthetics are currency, is asking the same question that started this story. Why did we stop? The answer isn't one thing. It's a century of ideology, economics, lost knowledge, and institutional momentum. The modernists weren't wrong that the old world needed changing, but in burning the ornament, they burned the vocabulary, and we've been building in silence ever since. The buildings that moved us most were never just shelter. They were arguments, in stone, in glass, in light, that the world we build should be worth